It was a house like any other, or so it seemed, when Emma and Daniel Gray, a couple in their early 30s, stumbled upon it during their search for a new home. Nestled in the countryside of the Netherlands, near a quiet village that felt suspended in time, the house was large, imposing, and old, exactly the kind of home they envisioned for their growing family. It had a certain charm, but beneath it, something unsettling lingered. What made the house famous, though, was not its history, nor its size, but its former inhabitant Rutger Hauer, the iconic actor. He had lived there in the years leading up to his death in 2019. Known for his memorable roles in films like Blade Runner and The Hitcher, Hauer was a man of mystery, and even in his final years, he maintained an air of solitude around him. The house, with its grandiose design, seemed like a perfect reflection of the man, beautiful, yet eerie, untouched by time, much like the actor's enigmatic career. When the Greys discovered the house, they had no idea of the actor's past connection to it. It wasn't until after they signed the contract and moved in that the stories began to surface. It didn't take long for local villagers to whisper about the odd occurrences that had taken place in the house during Hauer's time there. Neighbors spoke of him as a reclusive figure, rarely seen except for brief moments when he'd step out for walks at dawn, his tall frame casting long shadows against the misty mornings. They said he seemed haunted, as if something or someone followed him. It started with small things. Emma would hear the creak of floorboards late at night, long after Daniel had fallen asleep. At first, she chalked it up to the house's age. But then came the cold spots, areas in the house that chilled to the bone, no matter how much the thermostat was turned up. Daniel, ever the skeptic, dismissed it as a draft. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. One evening, after a particularly strange encounter with a painting of Rutger Hauer hanging in the study, a portrait that seemed to follow her around the room, Emma decided to do some research on the house. What she uncovered was enough to send shivers down her spine. She discovered that the house had been owned by Hauer for over 2 decades, and during his time there, several visitors reported strange noises and feelings of being watched. Most disturbing was a story from one of Hauer's former caretakers, who claimed the actor spoke of hearing footsteps in the house, footsteps that did not belong to him. Rutger had even confessed on more than one occasion that the house was not truly empty. As Emma dug deeper, she found a local newspaper article from the year Hauer moved into the house. In it, he was quoted saying, "This place calls to me. Feels like it's been waiting for me." The words seemed cryptic, but to Emma, they held a chilling weight. The incidents grew more frequent as time passed. One night, Daniel woke to find Emma standing in front of the living room mirror, staring at her reflection with an expression of pure terror. When he asked what was wrong, she whispered that she'd seen Rutger's face just for a moment behind her own reflection. The next morning, the mirror was cracked in several places, though they couldn't remember it being damaged the night before. In the months that followed, the Greys began to feel more and more like intruders in the home. They would hear the sound of a door creaking open on its own, the soft hum of a piano playing in the background, despite there being no piano in the house. Emma, who had always been sensitive to energy, described the house as alive in ways she couldn't explain. There were times when she would sit in the library, surrounded by Hauer's collection of books, and feel as though he were right there beside her, his presence tangible in the air. By the time autumn arrived, Daniel couldn't ignore it any longer. He, too, began to feel the weight of the house's strange energy. He woke one night to the sound of whispers, low, indistinct voices coming from the hallway outside their bedroom. When he went to investigate, no one was there. Yet, the whispers continued, now muffled, like they were coming from the walls themselves. The turning point came one night in late October. Emma, alone in the house while Daniel was away on a business trip, experienced the most terrifying event. She woke to the smell of old cigarette smoke, a smell she hadn't encountered in the house before. She followed the scent to the attic, where she found an old chair, dust-covered but seemingly untouched by time. As she approached, the air grew thick and the temperature dropped. She felt something or someone breathing behind her. Terrified, she fled the attic, but not before hearing the unmistakable sound of footsteps following her down the stairs. That night, Emma finally reached out to the locals, asking if they knew any details about Hauer's life in the house. The response she received was not what she expected. An elderly woman, who claimed to have known Hauer personally, revealed that the actor had once spoken about a shadow that had followed him into the house. The woman believed it was an old spirit, a presence that had been tied to the land long before Hauer's arrival. "It was never really his house," the woman said, "and I think he knew it." After that, Emma and Daniel decided to leave. They put the house on the market, but not before a final, unsettling incident. As they packed up, Daniel found an old photograph tucked inside a drawer in the study. A photograph of Rutger Hauer, much younger, standing in front of the house with a look of grim determination on his face. On the back, written in delicate handwriting, was a message: "I tried to escape. It wouldn't let me." The Greys never spoke about the house after they moved out. They found another home, far from the shadows of Rutger Hauer's legacy. But they would never forget the strange occurrences, the sense of being watched, and the chilling idea that maybe, just maybe, the house had never been empty after all. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Months passed since the Greys left the house, but for Emma, the memories lingered like a heavy fog. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear the whispering voices that had once filled the empty rooms, feel the strange cold spots that had never quite warmed, and see the unsettling portrait of Rutger Hauer, his eyes forever watching her. It wasn't the house that haunted her now, but the impression it had left on her mind. The lingering dread, the sensation that something or someone was still there, still waiting for the next person to cross its threshold. It was Daniel, in the dead of winter, who first suggested returning to the house. "Maybe we just need closure," he said, his voice tight, as though trying to convince himself as much as Emma. He'd become increasingly quiet over the months that followed their move, and she had noticed how often he stared off into space, as if thinking about something he couldn't fully grasp. "I don't know," Emma had replied, her tone wavering between fear and reluctance. "I'm not sure it's a good idea. You remember the attic, don't you?" He nodded but remained silent, his gaze fixed on the cold, empty space outside their apartment window. Emma knew then that it wasn't just the house that haunted him. It was the things they had experienced in it, the feelings they could never quite explain, the way the air seemed to thicken with an oppressive weight that grew heavier the longer they stayed. But in the end, Daniel's desire to face whatever lingering doubts he had about the house won out. They decided to return, not for any sense of reconciliation or closure, but because, deep down, they both knew they couldn't live with the uncertainty. They needed to confront it, if only to silence the nagging voices in their minds. The drive was long, and as they neared the village, Emma couldn't help but feel a knot tightening in her stomach. The landscape outside the car window was empty, barren fields stretching as far as the eye could see, the skeletal remains of trees standing against the gray sky like silent sentinels. The house itself loomed in the distance, its sharp angles and crumbling stonework now more imposing than ever. The closer they got, the more Emma's pulse quickened. There was something about it, a presence, like a shadow stretching across the land. The house had always felt like it was watching, but now it seemed to be waiting for them, as though it knew they would return. They arrived just before dusk, the low sun casting long shadows across the front yard. Emma felt a sudden wave of nausea rise in her chest. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the feeling only deepened. The air seemed wrong here, thick and heavy, almost as though it had become saturated with the memories of everything that had happened in the house. Daniel pulled the car to a stop, and they sat in silence for a moment, the engine's hum the only sound breaking the stillness. Emma stared at the house, her eyes drawn to the upper windows, where the curtains swayed slightly in the wind. Was it just the breeze, or did the house seem to breathe with them? Without a word, Daniel opened the door and stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel. Emma followed, hesitating for a moment before crossing the threshold. She expected the air inside to feel different, colder perhaps, but it was worse than she imagined. The house seemed unchanged, as though it had been preserved in time, but there was an undeniable sense of decay beneath the surface. The faint smell of mildew clung to the air, but beneath that, Emma could still smell the lingering traces of tobacco smoke, the same smell she had encountered in the attic the night she had fled in terror. She inhaled deeply, almost as though trying to get a fix on it. But the scent only seemed to disappear as quickly as it came, vanishing into the silence that swallowed the house. The interior was exactly as they remembered, though now it felt more like a museum than a home. Dust clung to the surfaces, the furniture frozen in place as though it had never been touched. The walls, lined with heavy, dark tapestries and portraits, looked almost too perfect, too still. Emma's gaze drifted to the portrait of Rutger Hauer, now hanging in the hallway, its presence more oppressive than ever. His eyes, those piercing blue eyes, seemed to follow her as she moved, their intensity striking in a way that felt unnatural. "Do you ever get the feeling that it's all watching us?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel, who had been quietly inspecting the hallway, glanced back at her with a strained expression. He nodded but didn't speak. He didn't need to. They both felt it, the suffocating presence of the house, the weight of its history pressing down on them, the strange sensation of being observed by unseen eyes. They made their way through the house slowly, their footsteps echoing through the cavernous rooms. Emma's skin crawled as she passed each familiar place, the cold air seeming to wrap itself around her, thick and oppressive. She noticed that the wallpaper in the dining room had started to peel away in places, exposing the wood beneath. A faint creaking sound came from above, just the house settling. She told herself, though it sounded too deliberate, too knowing. "Let's go upstairs," Daniel suggested after a long silence. He had avoided looking at the staircase, but now he seemed almost drawn to it. Emma hesitated, but eventually followed him up the narrow stairs, the floorboards creaking beneath their weight. At the top, the hallway stretched out before them, the doors to the bedrooms standing closed and silent. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was waiting behind those doors. As they walked down the corridor, a chill swept through her, colder than before, as if the house itself had taken a deep breath and exhaled into the hallway. They reached the door to the attic, and Emma froze. It was exactly as she remembered it, the heavy wooden door, the faint smell of decay, the quiet, suffocating darkness behind it. She could feel the same coldness creeping up her spine, the same unease rising in her chest. Daniel turned to her, his hand resting on the doorknob, his face pale. "Are you sure you want to go up there?" he asked softly, his voice tight with unspoken fear. But Emma already knew what he was thinking, what they both were thinking. The attic had been the epicenter of their terror before, the place where everything had felt most alive, most real. And now, standing before it again, Emma knew that they could not leave without confronting whatever lingered there. The door creaked open, and a sudden gust of cold air rushed past them, like the breath of something ancient and long forgotten. The attic, shrouded in darkness, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. As Emma stepped inside, the temperature dropped so sharply that her breath turned to mist. The floorboards creaked beneath her, and her eyes began to adjust to the dim light filtering through the small, dusty window. It was there, in the far corner, that she saw it, just a glimpse at first, something moving, shifting in the shadows. She couldn't quite make it out, but it felt wrong. Felt like it was waiting for them. The thing in the corner was subtle at first, barely noticeable, just a flicker of motion that seemed to distort the air. A ripple across the darkness, like the shifting of fabric or the movement of something behind a curtain. Emma's heart began to race, each beat thundering in her chest as the cold air pressed in tighter, suffocating and relentless. The floor beneath her feet felt fragile, as though the house itself might crack open at any moment, revealing something far worse than the shadows it concealed. Daniel, standing beside her, had gone completely still. He had seen it too. She could tell by the way his hand trembled on the doorframe, the way his breath came in short, shallow bursts. They both knew this was no trick of the light, no passing draft. The air had thickened, taking on a weight that felt almost alive, as if the attic itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Emma's gaze flickered back to the far corner, where the shadows seemed to pulse, growing darker, more oppressive with each passing second. She swallowed hard, her throat dry and tight. "We need to leave," she whispered, though she wasn't sure whether she was speaking to Daniel or to herself. But Daniel didn't move. His eyes were fixed on that corner, his face pale, lips parted as if he was trying to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Emma could see the muscles in his jaw tightening, a deep, primal fear taking hold of him. He had always been the skeptic, the one who dismissed the strange occurrences as coincidence or imagination. But now, in this place, he was starting to understand that there were things beyond their comprehension, things that did not belong in the world they knew. Something shifted again in the corner, a darker shape emerging from the shadows, and for the first time, Emma saw it clearly. It wasn't a person, not in any way she understood. It was a collection of shadows, a formless mass that seemed to twist and ripple like smoke, its edges fraying and splintering, constantly changing shape. She could feel it now, pressing against her skin, the pull of its presence as though it was drawing her in, trying to tether her to it. Daniel stepped forward, his hand reaching toward the darkness. His fingers barely brushed the air before the temperature in the room dropped even further, as though the thing in the corner resented the intrusion, its presence becoming more aggressive. The shadows seemed to move faster, swirling in unnatural patterns, and for a brief, terrible moment, Emma thought she saw a face, Rutger Hauer's face, emerging from the blackness. His eyes hollow and staring directly at her, unblinking, as though frozen in time, as though trapped within the very walls of the house. A chill ran down Emma's spine, and in that instant, she realized the truth: the house, the shadows, the oppressive feeling they had both been running from. It was all part of something bigger, something that had been waiting long before they arrived. The house had never been empty, not in any real sense. It was a vessel, a conduit for something that had attached itself to the land, to the house, to Rutger Hauer himself. The actor had sensed it, had known it all along. Even when he made that strange remark about the house calling to him, he hadn't just been speaking metaphorically. He had felt it, the presence that lingered in the dark corners, in the places where the house's foundations had been cracked and eroded by time. Suddenly, the air shifted again, more violently this time, and the mass of shadow surged forward, moving with an unnatural speed. It enveloped them both in a dark, suffocating wave, a force so powerful that it knocked Emma off her feet. She crashed to the ground, the old wood splintering beneath her weight. Her breath was stolen from her as the shadows closed in, cold and damp, wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud. In that moment, Emma could feel it, the presence, pressing against her, whispering things she couldn't understand, things that made her skin crawl and her heart race. Daniel cried out, but his voice was lost in the noise, the roaring, hissing sound of wind and whispers, the strange crackling as though something was burning in the air. The shadows seemed to respond to his fear, twisting tighter around him, pulling him deeper into the dark corner where they had first appeared. His form was barely visible now, consumed by the growing darkness, his outline flickering like a candle in a storm. "Daniel!" Emma screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the cacophony of whispers. She tried to reach for him, but the shadows seemed to resist, pushing her back, pulling her into their cold, empty embrace. And then, through the oppressive darkness, through the choking fear, Emma saw something that made her freeze. Rutger Hauer's face, no longer a distant vision in the corner, was now right in front of her. His features distorted, his expression twisted in a grimace of anguish. His eyes, wide and unblinking, locked onto hers, and she felt a sudden surge of recognition. He wasn't just a figure from the past, some distant celebrity who had once inhabited this space. No, he had become part of it, part of the house's cursed history, a vessel for whatever had been waiting here long before his arrival. Rutger's mouth moved, but the words came out garbled, muffled by the oppressive air around them. She couldn't make sense of them, but she could feel their weight, their finality. His gaze shifted to Daniel, and then, for just a moment, it seemed as though a flicker of something, regret, maybe, or even recognition, passed through his expression. Rutger's eyes lingered on Emma for a second longer, and in that instant, she understood the truth. He had never escaped the house. He had never left it. He had become part of it, like everyone who had ever stepped inside its walls. And now he was trying to warn her. Before she could react, the shadow surged once more, and everything went black. When Emma woke, she was lying on the cold floor of the attic, the oppressive darkness gone. The house was silent. The whispers had stopped. She could feel the weight of the air lifting, but her limbs were heavy, her mind disoriented. She struggled to sit up, her vision blurry, but when she finally did, she saw that Daniel was gone. Not just gone from the attic, but gone entirely, as though he had never been there at all. The house was empty again, but Emma knew it wasn't truly empty. It never would be. It was just waiting like it always had. The house had a new story to tell, a new presence to haunt its walls. And somewhere, deep within the foundation, Rutger Hauer's eyes, those blue, hollow eyes, would always be watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.